Thank you for making time to come on Good Morning Kenya and tell us about your journey in the world of finance. Now, as a leader in the world of finance and in development finance, what does it mean for you to be a woman at the helm and also in a traditionally male-dominated field?
Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Elizabeth Gathu, but I actually normally go by Liz Gathu. Most people in the industry and even in my personal life know me as Liz Gathu. I work with Microsoft Consulting under the Banking, Financial Services and Insurance Department. But in terms of my profession, I work in development finance, and specifically I design products, I design programs in trade and agri-value chain systems for development finance. It's actually been quite interesting because when you find yourself in that situation, you can decide to ignore the problem and move forward. But at the time, what happened at the bank is because it was so sad to see a client be disadvantaged, there was a committee that was formed to ensure that the TAT of a client getting a solution is fast, so that a client does not lose out on an opportunity just because there's an inefficiency in the system. So that was a beginning point, and that's more on a very micro level. So with that, I got more opportunities to interact with people at a larger scale. So we'd sit in forums like, for example, where we sit at agri-strategies for the African Continental Free Trade Area that encompasses trade across the continent. How are these goods now moving from maybe Kenya as an East African bloc to maybe West Africa, and what are the challenges? So that one client was a challenge on the ground on how do they get a tender maybe for the government or a service for the government, but now on a larger scale, how do you ensure that goods or services move from one regional bloc to the next with ease? Yeah.
You stated that you care deeply about who gets access to opportunity. Now, how has your own journey as a woman shaped this mission?
My parents are MSMEs in Kenya, and growing up, I could see the impact they had on us as a family and also the extended family that they will support. And eventually in my career, I'd often interact with so many MSMEs since I started working, and I could see how hard they work, but sometimes they're not getting the actual access to opportunities, or even if they see the opportunity, they do not know how to adopt to the opportunity or partake or participate in the opportunity. So for me, it started in terms of my personal life, but then that grew into something bigger on a bigger scope, and I had or have the opportunity to sit in a macro level or in a meso level where I can actually speak and bring these voices to the ground in terms of where policy is made, decision makers sit, and how capital is structured, just to ensure that these opportunities actually get to the people on the ground, as participating on both on the ground and also in this where these forums happen.
What is the most significant barrier that you've had to face, and how did you overcome it to reach this level of continental influence?
So as I started in my career, I'd interact with a lot of business owners who happen to be women or young people in the different sectors, in the different industry, and even in the different markets, whether be it in West Africa, Central Africa, or even in East Africa. And then with that, most of what will happen on the ground or what we'll interact with on the ground will rarely be translated into the markets or where we sit. And how does that look like? Like, what happens in the ground is not where capital reflects. Like, when you sit with financial institutions or development funders, they do not have an understanding, a true understanding of what's happening on the ground. But now with the opportunities that we have, or I have as an individual, I get to bring these insights, whether in form of data, whether in forms of stories, and that now helps us design systems and design structures or products that actually marry to what is happening on the ground. So how do these women think? For example, if it's a woman in the market who has to come with her child and her child is sleeping at the bottom of the kibanda and that woman has to sell the whole day, why would you design a product that she has to leave her kibanda and go to a bank or a financial institution Or that woman hasn't paid school fees, but she also requires capital for her business. How do you marry the two, the personal need or also the business need? So it's basically understanding how the women think, how they operate their business, and what are the social behaviors that can help us understand them better and structure for them better.
How are you using your position to ensure that the future is female and for the next generation of African women leaders?
So as I started in my career, I'd interact with a lot of business owners who happen to be women or young people in the different sectors, in the different industries, and even in the different markets, whether be it in West Africa, Central Africa, or even in East Africa. And then with that, most of what will happen on the ground or what we'll interact with on the ground will rarely be translated into the markets or where we sit. And how does that look like? Like what happens in the ground is not where capital reflects. Like when you sit with financial institutions or development funders, they do not have a true understanding of what's happening on the ground. But now with the opportunities that we have, or I have as an individual, I get to bring these insights, whether in form of data, whether in forms of stories, and that now helps us design systems and design structures or products that actually marry to what is happening on the ground. So how do these women think? For example, if it's a woman in the market who has to come with her child and her child is sleeping at the bottom of the kibanda and that woman has to sell the whole day, where would you design a product that she has to leave her kibanda and go to a bank or a financial institution? Or that woman hasn't paid school fees, but she also requires capital for her business. How do you marry the two, the personal need or also the business need? So it's basically understanding how the women think, how they operate their business, and what are the social behaviors that can help us understand them better and structure for them better.
You know, sometimes trade and finance can feel abstract. In the context of agricultural value chains, what does it look like for small producers, traders, and SMEs? Where are the biggest gaps?
So in that we look at the two different components. The first one is trade, and the second one is the agri-value chain. At least we've discussed the agri-value chain and the different players. We have the producers, the traders in between, aggregators or off-takers, and the end consumer or the end client. And then in trade is basically the movement of goods and services and the people incorporated into that. So what is a good? How is it moving? As I said, if it's eggs, how are the eggs moving from the producer to the end producer, to the end retailer or aggregator? Or if it's milk, milk is a product, how is it moving? If it's beef that's moving from Nairobi to maybe Oman in the UAE, in the Middle East, how does that good move? So once you understand what is a product, who moves it, and how does it move? So that is a basic component on what we need to understand. So then above that is how does the money follow the process? So if you're a beef producer, what amount of money do you need to buy? Maybe the cows or the goats, or the cows that you are going to slaughter. And then what do you need to aggregate them to a certain point? How do you slaughter them? How do you get them loaded? And how do you get paid? Or what is the minimum order basically needed at the end of that? And how do you work backwards to understand what quantity do I need to produce and what quantity do I need to sell? So that is how money moves. So where are you buying your products from, and how long does it take before you get paid? So once you understand that, you now need to understand what are the different components. For example, do you need a pro forma invoice to get a bank to finance you in terms of getting your cows? Or if it's your fish, do you need someone to invest in you to get your fingerlings? You make them grow for like 8 months, and then once you sell, you can pay it back. So the components now, once you follow the money, will determine, is it a pro forma invoice that you need? Is it a bid bond? Is it invoice financing? And what are the different components? Because wherever that money is moving from, whether you're a producer, a trader, or it's in the production cycle or in the selling cycle, will determine the different trade component. That's in a nutshell. So assuming you're a tender for the government, do you need a performance bond or a bid bond before you actually tender, to just show that you're capable of doing this business? If today you went into a newspaper and saw that you need to produce two tons, maybe to the Middle East. What do you need from that? Do you need to show them that you have the capacity through a bid bond, or are you able to perform this? So some of them will require a specific trade document. And then once you've shipped, how do they pay you? Do they pay you in cash immediately, or you need like a letter of credit for them to pay you? So depending on how big you are or how small you are, even a Fuliza facility can be seen as a trade finance model, because that's an overdraft that you borrow in the morning and it fluctuates, and you pay in the evening or you pay the next day. Yeah, and not a loan per se. Yeah. Yes.
Let's get to the question of women and youth. They play a very pivotal role, especially when it comes to these value chains that we are talking about, yet they remain underserved. So what would you say are the biggest structural barriers that continue to lock them out of trade and finance?
So women and youth tend to have the same traits and characteristics. First and foremost, they tend to play on the bottom of the value chains, like the lower value chains. For example, the goods or the services that have the least value. So, and most of them also tend not to have assets. So if you are a fisherman at the lake or a fishmonger at the lake, you're not a boat owner. You do not own assets. All you do is you own that component of the trade. And then most of them also tend to be very informal. So those are the three main challenges that we see for the youth and women. They tend to be informal, they tend to participate in smaller value chains, and then it also means that they do not own assets. So with that characteristics, already we can see some of the challenges. One of the challenges is that, yes, they do have frequent income, but it's actually very seasonal, number one, and very small. So they have daily cash flows and also now require more, more flexible repayment periods, either daily repayment periods, weekly or monthly to a certain extent. And then because they do not have assets, or because they do not own assets, traditional capital in terms of commercial capital requires collateral. And when you look at the youth and the women, they do not own this type of assets. So hence, they're already missing out on a whole opportunity. And the financial institutions miss out on a whole client altogether. And then last but not least, the informality bit of it. You cannot prove to me as you, and if you're a youth or a woman that is trading informally, that I sell 5,000 eggs every day, I sell it to this person, I buy them at 5 shillings, I sell them at 7 shillings. That is just theoretical and a story you're telling me. But so long as you can't prove that to me, it will be very hard for me to look at you as a business case and know how do I value you as a business and to what extent of capital can we give you a solution. So those are the three main challenges that youth and women in the agri-value chain face. So first and foremost, we have challenges that they need to address amongst themselves, like the women and youth. So if it's informalities, what can we work with, or what can you do with you in your informality to make you at least visible? So at some point, these women and youth actually do record on what they do. They record it either in their notebooks or on their phones. Like today, I sold 2 mandazis in the morning, or I sold 5 bananas, and then by the end of the day, they do their calculations. How do you ensure that that can be made visible to the financial institutions? We have financial institutions we have worked with that have digital applications that now the woman or the youth does not have to fill it in their notebooks, but they actually have the digital platform. And then with time, like after a month or after 3 months or after 6 months, can actually come and say, okay, in 1 month you've sold 20,000 bananas, you buy them at 5 shillings per banana, you sell them at 10 shillings per banana, this is your margin, this is how much you're making. It's actually a business case. You're right, this is what you sell, and this is what opportunity you can get, because they also see you can scale your business from 2 kibandas to 5 kibandas in Marikiti, for example, and that's how we value you. So that's number one, working with the actual women and the youth. On the other side is working with the financial institutions. So a financial institution will require collateral. Are there other ways you can assess risk or reduce your risk with this women or with this youth? And how does that look like? Women and youth have group models that they're already working in. Sometimes they meet every week, or they contribute every day. At the end of the day, you've sold your 10 bananas, maybe I'm contributing 100 shillings. How can that contribution be made formal and used as a collateral, either as a group dynamics or as a savings dynamics. And now not asking for houses or land or boats or properties, but actually into the business cash flows and what they do on a daily basis. And then last but not least is just working with them and following them and understanding that your business is weekly. I've seen in your tracks, okay, my product pays monthly. How do I reduce it for you to pay either daily, bi-weekly, or monthly, based on how your business moves? And that solves the 3 challenges for all 2 parties.
What are you doing differently to make trade and finance work better for, agribusinesses, and especially for women and small traders?
We sit at the intersection of the actual people on the ground and the decision makers. So whether they're industry decision makers, development institutions, DFIs, and financial institutions. So that gives us a bigger and broader view of both sides. So it's taking this information of the people you work with on the ground, the women in the market, the women on the borders, the youth who do not have jobs and they want to start enterprises, and taking that information as data, as insights now to the other side of policymakers, whether it's a DFI, whether it's a donor. And then with the donor, these are the insights you have. So if you want to make a huge impact on maybe the fishery sector, or a huge impact on the dairy sector, or a huge impact on the cross-border women that you work with, these are their characteristics, these are their biggest gaps, this is how we see they can scale. And then we design and structure programs with the different partners, whether other implementing partners or other donors, and see how do we structure now the capital that they have coming down this way. And now with the people on the ground is, how do you best prepare yourself to receive this opportunity? Whether it's a capacity building opportunity, whether it's a grants opportunity, or whether it's an information opportunity. Yeah.
You advocate for gender intelligent banking. So why is a gender neutral approach falling short, and what does it look like in practice to design, financial solutions that actually work for women and women who are in these value chains?
So when we speak of gender neutrality in anything, whether it's in the medical field, whether it's in the finance field, so long as you do not design for a specific segment, you're not designing for anyone. So if you're designing, how do you measure, assuming you're in health, what are the symptoms of a heart attack in a human body? The symptoms in a heart attack for a man are very different from the symptoms of a heart attack in a woman. So you have to be very gender-centric and intelligent in who you're designing for. It's the same thing in finance. So if you're designing for a young woman somewhere in an African context, and you're designing for a man, what you look at are totally different things. So as you said, women and youth, and more specifically women, tend to play in the smaller value chain that have the least value. They do not have assets, and they tend to be very informal. So those are already their characteristics. So you're not really designing for the gender itself, it's for the characteristics and the human-centered design for how they behave and how they run their businesses. Same thing, women work better in groups, in group dynamics, they learn better in groups, and with products that are peer-led or capacity building that is peer-led, women respond better to those. It's very hard for us to work with men in groups, and men tend to work more individually. So if you're bringing information to male-owned enterprises, working with them as individuals as opposed to groups, they receive information better, they change their behavior better, and improve their businesses better, because they do not want to bring the private information in the group setting and so on and so forth. So gender intelligent banking is not ensuring that you do not throw a wide net hoping to catch everyone and then you catch no one, but at least it's centered towards a specific group and demographic, depending on the strategy of the institution.
Much of agri-trade runs on informal systems, saving groups and trust-based networks. When you look at financial institutions today, how can they do, or what can they do better to connect these realities instead of trying to replace them?
So we've seen a lot of improvements in the financial sector in the past decade, be it in Kenya or in other markets that we work in, and mostly because, as you said, most financial institutions are actually not looking to change the group dynamics to suit them, but actually now changing and shifting their behavior now into what they see in the group dynamics. So incorporating the social capital within the groups and incorporating the group structures. So how does that look like? So we've seen more and more institutions, especially in group lending models, moving from asking for a physical collateral, maybe of or stock or property, and now moving into what are the group dynamics? How often do you meet? Can I measure your discipline in terms of your meetings on your notes or on your minutes? Can you show us the minutes, or can I give you an application and show us, oh, we meet every week, once a week or once a month, and every time we meet, we contribute maybe 5,000 shillings every weekly. And then can I follow that behavior for a month? And then can I use that behavior as a collateral as opposed to asking for property? And that has actually worked very well. And we've seen women are actually better at repayment. And it's actually a healthier portfolio in all group models. And then after that, when they have traceability in terms of their finances, in terms of their financial behaviors, they're actually onboarded on the formal financial services. How can they graduate as individuals? Because now, other than me borrowing or wanting to operate as a group, can I do that individually? So they also have the autonomy to decide, okay, now I've done that as a group. I'm actually convinced that the bank wants to help me, or this circle wants to help me, or this microfinance wants to help me. Now I'm comfortable doing this alone. We've actually seen so many women who grow and actually want like loans of up to 20 million shillings, but still want it in the group dynamics, because it also gives them security and privacy in what they do. Maybe they do not want to know what their family members to know what they're investing in. So they hide at least behind the groups and still grow as a group. And we've actually seen the social capital in groups works as a better model as opposed to just a general credit scoring models, because they have more loyalty to how they operate as opposed to just a system or a financial institution.
You've worked across multiple market systems. What does, quote unquote, moving markets and changing lives mean to you personally? And what would success look like for the next generation of African women in finance and trade?
I think for me, biggest success will be, first and foremost, when we look at a woman in terms of her business and in terms of the business they operate. Most women will start their businesses either as a hobby or just to make ends meet. But now how do we move that, just them wanting to just survive from survival mode, but to actually them scaling to a resilient and a thriving business? And then how do we encourage them through the system? Yeah. So success for me will look like, as a woman who started selling 5 bananas by the roadside on a very informal market that rains, she goes back home and comes back in the evening, to her moving cargo maybe from here to Europe, and that's what success will look for me. It will look as for me. So this person sells 1 or 2 bananas, and then how do we grow with them to ensure that they understand markets, they understand minimum quantity orders, they understand different trade instruments, and they actually scale and employ others in the markets. Currently, agri and agri-value chains support up to between 50 to 70 million families in Africa. So you can imagine if these families are actually maybe being supported by one family member there, if this business just growing is actually growing the capacity and capability and the thriving models of these different families. An amazing project I remember working with is one of the biggest FMCGs in the world. They were working with women and they'd work with them from 2 to 5 years, ensuring, yes, you're a small entrepreneur right now, but how can I work with you for the next 5 years to ensure in 5 years I can onboard you into my procurement system, that you're ISO certified, you have this number of certificates, so that you have a tangible client, so that even when you go to a financial institution to lend to you, you're not going alone as a woman, but you're going with the backing of this FMCG that you're working in or you're working with, just for growth and scale. So that it takes time, yes, but do we work with them to ensure that they actually grow and scale? So with finance and trade, you'd be in different components. You can be a banker, you can be an entrepreneur, you can be in the development space like I am, but it's very wide and it's broad. So in whatever space that you're in, actually just get the the insights, or just seek to understand more, and then in whatever scope you're in, how do you make it better? So assuming you're a tumba business in Gikomba, for example, how does trade look for you? How do the clothes get to you, and how do you move them? Do you do it digitally, or do you do it physically? So in whatever component you are, what trade instruments will you require? What does trade need for you? Look as for you. Do you need to be registered to grow big? If you're part of the service providers like ourselves and in the sector and in the ecosystem, how do you help the women that you work with, whether the large enterprises, the small micro enterprises, simply by understanding how they behave, why they behave the way they do, and how the can opportunity get to them directly? Yeah, just a keen to understand and then grow from there.
I want you to look into the camera and talk to a woman or a young girl who is watching you right now. What is your message to them?
You can do it, and the future is bright.